Rabbinic Judaism and the Geonim. Where did it come from? Let's start by looking at the word rabbi. Rabbi means my master and has taken on 3 different meanings over time. A deferential form of address, a way for students to address their teachers, and finally, creators of valuable literature. In 70 CE, after the Great Revolt, the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans, bringing the end of the Second Commonwealth. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai relocated the Sanhedrin with limited power to Yavne, with the Nasi at the head. This begins the journey of Rabbinic Judaism. Let's take a look at 3 generations of rabbis, starting with the Tanaim. The Tanaim were the rabbis from 70 to 200 CE and are known for their oral law, the Mishnah. Unlike the rest of the Jews at the time, the Tanaim were wealthy and landowning rabbis. But how do we know this? By comparing Roman society and the Mishnah, we can learn how the Tanaim really lived. Upper-class Romans were few in number and had jobs like landowning and tax collecting. The lower class had a large population and worked as shepherds and farm workers. Law in the Mishnah focuses on landowning, while disregarding business, trade, manufacturing, and marketing. We also learn from the Mishnah that there were not many Tanaim. The overlap between Roman society and the Mishnah show us that the Tanaim were wealthy, landowning, had a small population, and looked down on the lower class. But how much power did the Tanaim actually have? At this time, not all Jews followed rabbinic law, so the weight of the Tanaim's rulings varied between communities. And now, it's time to talk about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. The codification of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi's most well-known achievement, even though it did not have such a large impact on the Jews as a whole. This is because it was created to be studied amongst scholars, so the average Jew did not understand the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi's accomplishments also include centralizing the rabbis around yeshivas in cities and installing sages to act as judges and scribes in local communities, establishing political connections with the Romans, facilitating the rabbis' entrance into Palestine's population centers, creating paid positions as rabbis, and strengthening the Jewish community by making Judaism more accessible to everyone. From here, we go to the next generation of rabbis, the Amoraim. The Amoraim are the rabbis who lived from 220 to 500 CE and are responsible for creating the Talmud. The relationship between the Amoraim and the Nasi elevated the status and authority of the rabbis, hence elevating the status and authority of Jewish law. In relation to the Tanaim, the Amoraim were a larger group of rabbis, addressed fewer cases of purity laws, and addressed more cases relevant in day-to-day Jewish life. Evidently, the scales were tipping away from tradition and in favor of halakha. This explains the Amoraim's rise in prestige. Under the Amoraim, rabbinic Judaism began to flourish. However, it was only under the Geonim that rabbinic Judaism thrived in a way it had never before. The Geonim were the generation of rabbis who lived from 700 to 1000 CE and were the rabbis who created responsa. Under the Islamic Caliphate, Jews, as well as Christians, were considered dhimmi, a protected minority. In exchange for this status, these second-class citizens followed the Pact of Umar, a document that contained rights and restrictions for the dhimmi to abide by, and paid the yearly jizya tax. Life for Jews was great, and it was about to get even better. The Abbasids replaced the Umayyads and took over the Caliphate, a shift that greatly strengthened rabbinic Judaism. The Abbasids moved the capital of the empire from Damascus to Baghdad, which was home to many great Jewish academies. Another positive shift for the Jews was the status of the exilarch under the Abbasids. The exilarch collected and organized the Jews' taxes, enforced the Pact of Umar, and mediated and intervened in issues within the Jewish community. The solidified relationship between the exilarch and the caliph strengthened the Jewish community through the increase in power of Jewish leadership. Let's talk about the Geonim. Who are they and what makes them so important? The Geonim were the heads of the rabbinic academies, the judges of the Jewish Supreme Court, the administrators of courts, and the appointers of judges. It was at this time that the rabbis grew in both prestige and power. However, it was the Geonim's responsa and kala that elevated rabbinic Judaism the most. Responsa were the Geonim's halachic questions and replies. The questions came from both the Jews living outside of Babylon, who wanted to learn but were unfamiliar with the language of the Talmud, and from local scholars who needed the help of the Geonim to settle their machlokets. Kala took place during the months of Adar and Elul, when large gatherings of scholars would meet in the Babylonian academies to study specific tractates of Talmud. Many ordinary Jews not participating in studies throughout the day were interested in these teachings, and large groups would come and listen to the rabbis' public sermons. The strength of the Talmud, rabbinic Judaism, and the Geonim solidified the position of the rabbis as the leaders of world Jewry. And that is the story of the Geonim and the rise of rabbinic Judaism.